Hello and welcome to another edition of I'm Bastani with me, Aaron Bastani, at Aaron Bastani on Twitter. Thank you so much for watching. And this week I want to talk about an amazing, quite frankly, poll that was released by YouGov a couple of days ago. I'm speaking on Wednesday. I think it came out on the Monday or the Tuesday. It examined people's preferences for what countries they wanted to do well in the forthcoming Commonwealth Games. I don't want to talk about that, obviously. It also included questions surrounding Britain's colonial past. Did people regret Britain's empire, Britain's colonial past? Do they wish that Britain still had an empire? The results, quite frankly, were astonishing. It found that 44% were proud of Britain's history of colonialism, while only 21% regretted that it happened. 23% held neither views. That's not majority, but it's pretty damn close. The same poll also asked about whether the British Empire was a good or bad thing for those countries that had been colonised. Slightly less controversial question, you'd imagine. It's obviously a very bad thing for the countries that are colonised. 43% amazingly said it was good, while only 19% said it was bad. 25% responded that it was neither. Perhaps most amazingly of all, 34% wished that Britain still had an empire. 2016, 1/3 of the British public wishes that Britain had an empire. Britain, take a long hard look at yourself. And now I know what you're saying. You're saying, well, Aaron, you ought to miss that. I don't believe the polls. You always say that polls don't matter. Forget the polls. Don't listen to the polls. Often that's true. Here it's not really true, right? I mean, the sample was 1,741 people, so it could be bigger. These might not necessarily be correct, but I mean, you'd want to sample maybe 3,000 or 4,000, right? But 1,700 is pretty robust. Also, they've taken informants, they've got answers from across Britain. Clearly, a lot of people still wish that Britain still had an empire. Okay, it's not a majority, but it's a hell of a lot. For me, that sort of borders on a German saying that, you know, they wish the Third Reich was still about or something. I think that's kind of the same thing. That's really amazing. And I think this is a really important poll, and it tells us where the fuck we are. And that's a pretty bad place when it comes to white supremacism and the British public not being informed, not really caring, in fact, being quite proud of what is, in reality, an awful, regrettable, blood-stained colonial past. I know you're used to watching some of these videos, some of these IMO Bastanis, and you're used to me kind of getting angry, and that's my thing. But this is really amazing, right? I mean, it's one thing for people to be proud of Britain's colonial past. In fact, you'd expect that of traditional conservatives, old people. You'd expect that, right? It's another thing, this is slightly more idiotic, it's another thing to think that the colonies benefited from colonialism, okay? That's a bit more weird. It's really something else to think that Britain should still have an empire in 2016. I mean, literally nobody has an empire anymore, right? Who has an empire? I mean, okay, the Yanks. They've got military bases everywhere. That's not an empire. Empires cost loads of money. That's why they fell apart, you know, in the 1950s, because the European powers of the 19th century were no longer rich enough to really afford to keep them ticking over anymore. On the other hand, it's not that surprising when you think about it, right? I mean, every single institution, major institution in British civil society, the royal family, the BBC, the print media, most of the political parties most of the time, with the exception maybe the SNP and Labour under Corbyn, are really cool with Britain's colonial past. If you mention colonialism, they go, why do we have to keep on apologising about colonialism all the time? All you talk about is colonialism? You've never apologised. Nobody's ever apologised. What's more, motherfucker, let's not just talk about an apology, let's talk about reparations, right? And then they lose it. They lose it. You were taking people and capital and goods and services, and you were screwing over, you know, I think at one point, a quarter of the world's population or a quarter of the world's land surface was the British Empire, and a fifth of the world's population. You took these resources. I mean, you look at London, it's a beautiful city. Where do you think this wealth came from, right? It was extracted from much of the global south. You talk about maybe just an apology, let alone reparations, and they lose it. So first point, you're proud of the British Empire, you're proud of colonialism. That's screwed up, I can't really debate that. Was colonialism good for the countries that were colonised? Well, actually, we can talk about this, right? I mean, it obviously wasn't. It wasn't, okay? It wasn't, it just wasn't. China and India have been the world's two largest economies for 18 of the last 20 centuries. The Roman Empire, the great Roman Empire, yeah, which gave Europe modern Latin languages, gave them a rule of law basically, took Northern Europeans out of sort of hardwood forest barbarism and blue paint, you know, all these magnificent cities that were in the Near East and the Far East, and Europeans, especially in the North, were living in squalor until the Romans came along, right? Even these guys were running a trade deficit with Han China, yeah? Europe is some kind of weird, nothing, non-entity peninsula on kind of Eurasia, yeah, until the Industrial Revolution. It's kind of accident. Which, by the way, only happens in Britain because large urban areas are so near to ports and so near to large deposits of coal. Yeah? China doesn't have that historical good luck. Yeah? Otherwise, China probably would have become a big industrial power before Britain did. Yeah? Britain gets industrialised, Europe gets industrialised, and you know what? The rest of the world after that is just, it's fucked. Some of these racist people, statistically more likely to be old, statistically more likely to be in England, statistically more likely to be Tory voters, I imagine, okay, kind of neo-fascist really. They've been saying, Aaron, we gave them trains, you know? We gave them roads, we gave them schools, we gave them civilization. Okay, you did, there are lots of trains in India, it's true. Why were they there? It was to get goods out of the country as quickly as possible back into Britain, or to import stuff that's coming from Britain, right? So that's why there were trains. It was to get goods and services between places as quickly as possible, enriching Britons in the process, right? British capitalist class in the process. It wasn't about getting commuters from the country to the city or anything like that, right? It was about expediting the interests of British capital as quickly and as easily as possible. That's why it was created. It wasn't some sort of wonderful gesture, some kind gesture. Oh, give them trains, wonderful. No, it wasn't. It was about making rich people even richer. What Asian country was the exception? No? It was Japan. Japan was never colonized. And guess what? What Asian country became one of the most successful economies of the 20th century, was the second largest economy until very recently, overtaken of course by China. It's still the world's third largest economy. One of the world's leaders in robotics, industrial engineering, computers, you know, really high-tech stuff, yeah? It was Japan. How is that possible? Meiji Restoration, 1868. Japanese aristocracy looks around. They say, you know, look, the Yanks are coming, the Brits are here. We've traded with the Dutch, they're kind of bums, they're second rate now. The Yanks, the Brits, the French, they've got superior firearms to us, technology, medicine. We don't want to end up like the Chinese, we don't want to end up like the Indians. What are we going to do? We're going to have to ensure they stay out, which they do, right? And we're going to have to develop and industrialise as quickly as possible. And guess what? In 5 decades, they develop so quickly that they kick the Russians' asses. They give Tsarist Russia's ass back to it on a plate. 1905 Russo-Japanese War. I hope we've got that out of the way, right? Colonialism was never good for the colonised, and the one country that was never colonised became one of the leading economies of the 20th century, Japan. In addition to that, the sins, the crimes of the British Empire are just indisputable. 1770, the Great Bengal Famine. 10 million Indians died. 10 million, yeah? Now, I don't want to make comparisons and equivalences between, say, the Holocaust, but that's kind of it's in the league, right? It's in the same league. Or Ukraine, under Stalin. 10 million die. Why? Primary reason was they were ensuring that farmers stopped planting rice and they were encouraging the cultivation of opium. Why did they encourage the cultivation of opium, a drug? Well, it was because it was the only thing the Chinese would buy, yeah? Trade deficit I was saying about Han China with the Roman Empire, guess what? That still hadn't gone. The Chinese, pretty much for the whole of history, the few exceptions, about 100 years, they were on a trade surplus with Europe. They don't want shit from us. They've got porcelain, silk. We've got salted cod. I mean, it's a joke. We've got nothing to give them, right? We can give them opium. The Brits basically forced, that's why the opium wars are called the opium wars. The Brits are forcing the opium on the Chinese to run a trade surplus. Where's the opium coming from? It's being grown in Bengal. Rice isn't being grown. Shit hits the fan. There's a famine, not enough rice. Loads of people died. 10 million people died. That was a decision overseen by the East India Company. Lots of people died. Okay? There's another Bengal famine, 1943. Not as bad, about 1.5 million people die. Again, it was a political decision, this time made by the British state, okay, not the East India Company, Churchill himself. And Churchill said, if Gandhi's still alive, then it can't be that bad. Perhaps even more chilling than the Bengal famine of 1770 and 1943, perhaps even more chilling than that, is the Boer War. Guess who invented concentration camps? Yeah, it was the Brits. It was against the Boers. They imprisoned vast swathes of the civilian population, killing 10% of the whole Boer population in 1 year in these camps, including 22,000 children. They began a process which characterised much the first half of the 20th century, explicitly targeting civilian populations as a means of beating one's enemy in the field. So I suppose I draw some succour from the fact that the younger people get, the less likely they are to have these really outdated, bizarre ideas. That's good. I suppose it's up to people like you, me, people that care about things getting better for humans in general, right, our species, to ensure that keeps on going. We've got to discredit Britain's colonial past at every opportunity. This country's not coming from a great place. Yeah? If you're talking about the history of exploitation, slavery, massacring people, killing people, depriving people of their land, depriving people of their history, Britain's number one. Let's give some of these countries some money back, yeah? Let's give them some money to adapt to climate change and all that it's going to bring. Let's give them money to transition to renewables. Let's give them money to transition to a different political economy. Let's give them money to make sure that their people are well educated, have good homes, yeah? Have energy infrastructure. Not because it's foreign direct investment, not because it's aid, not because it's charity, but because we took this stuff from them and it's time to give them something back. So what do you think? You know what I think? I think that Britain's colonial past is inexcusable. What's more, it needs to be addressed today through actions, not words. Why don't you put those thoughts down on the hashtag I'm Obastani, or reach out to me at Aaron Bastani on Novara Media, at Novara Media.